Rex's desperate barking echoed through the silent church as he lunged toward the polished mahogany coffin, his nails scraping against the marble floor. Officer Wilson yanked the leash back, face reddening with embarrassment as mourners turned to stare. The German shepherd wasn't grieving. He was trying to tell them something. Sandra Reynolds collapsed into the pew, her arthritic fingers clutching a handkerchief that had belonged to Thomas, while the pastor's soothing words dissolved into background noise. Tears streamed down her weathered face, the same face that had smiled in the photograph Thomas kept on his nightstand, a photo now collecting dust in an empty house. "Someone please control that animal," the funeral director hissed, his composure cracking. What did Rex know about her son's coffin that had turned the most disciplined K-9 officer in Millfield into a frantic, wild-eyed creature? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching. From now, let's continue with the story. Thomas Reynolds hadn't always been a K-9 officer. Before Rex came into his life, he was just another cop trying to make sense of returning to civilian life after 2 tours in Iraq. Millfield, Virginia, population 12,368, wasn't Baghdad, but it had its own kinds of wars. Drugs, poverty, and the slow decay of what once had been a thriving factory town. At 42, Thomas carried himself with the rigid posture of a man who'd seen too much. His weathered face rarely broke into a smile since losing his wife, Caroline, to breast cancer 3 years ago. Their small bungalow on Maple Street still had her touches: floral curtains in the kitchen, a collection of ceramic birds on the mantel, things Thomas couldn't bring himself to change. The day Rex came into his life hadn't been remarkable in any way. A drug bust gone sideways, a terrified German shepherd found chained in the basement, ribs showing through his matted fur. The dog had snapped at every officer except Thomas. "He likes you," Chief Parker had said. "Take him to the shelter, will you?" Thomas never made it to the shelter. Something in the dog's amber eyes, a wary intelligence, a desperate hope, reminded him of himself. By nightfall, the dog was sleeping on his living room floor. 6 months of training later, Rex became the department's most celebrated K-9 officer, with a perfect record for drug detection and tracking. Sandra Reynolds lived 2,000 miles away in Pasadena, California. At 68, she lived alone in the same 2-bedroom house where she'd raised Thomas after his father, also a police officer, had been killed in the line of duty. Their relationship had grown strained over the years, phone calls becoming shorter, visits rarer. What Thomas didn't know was that Sandra had been diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's 6 months ago. She kept this secret, terrified that her only son would see her as a burden. Johnny Miller was everything Thomas wasn't: young, optimistic, with an easy smile and an eagerness that sometimes grated on the older officers. At 28, he'd just bought his first house, a fixer-upper he talked about constantly during patrol shifts. He'd taken to following Thomas and Rex around, peppering them with questions. "How does he know the difference between drugs and, say, spices?" Johnny had asked once, watching Rex work. "Same way you know the difference between a pretty girl and a mannequin," Thomas had replied, the rare joke making even Rex seem to grin. None of them had known about Marcus Devereaux's return to Millfield. Once the department's rising star, Marcus had been fired 2 years ago amid accusations of evidence tampering and bribery. What the official reports didn't mention was his 16-year-old daughter's rare blood disorder, or the insurance company's refusal to cover experimental treatments that cost more than a year's police salary. The warehouse robberies began in early spring. At first, they seemed unremarkable, just another crime statistic in a town struggling to keep its head above water. The targets were all similar: pharmaceutical storage facilities on the outskirts of town, places with minimal security but valuable inventory, perfect for quick cash. "Third one this month," Chief Parker said, sliding the file across his desk to Thomas. Same MO, clean, professional. They're in and out in under 5 minutes. Know exactly what they're looking for. Thomas flipped through the report while Rex sat attentively at his feet. The German shepherd's ears perked forward as if he too was analyzing the case. Oxycodone, fentanyl patches, and morphine sulfate, Thomas read aloud. Street value? Close to 80,000 per hit, the chief replied, rubbing his gray temples. DEA's breathing down my neck. They think it's feeding the interstate pipeline. Thomas nodded, scratching behind Rex's ears absently. What do you need from us? You and the rookie, Miller, will work it together. Take Rex. I want eyes on the Medicorp warehouse tonight. Intelligence suggests it might be next. That evening, Thomas picked up Johnny in the unmarked police SUV, Rex already settled in his specialized compartment in the back. The young officer slid into the passenger seat with 2 cups of coffee and an eager smile that made Thomas feel ancient. First stakeout with the legendary team, Johnny grinned, handing over a cup. This is going to be awesome. Thomas grunted, accepting the coffee. Stakeouts are 99% boredom, 1% terror. Don't get your hopes up. They parked in the shadows across from the Medicorp facility, a nondescript concrete building with a chain-link fence and security lights that cast long shadows across the empty parking lot. Hours passed with nothing but occasional radio chatter and Johnny's increasingly desperate attempts at conversation. "So, how'd you get Rex?" the rookie finally asked around midnight, stifling a yawn. Thomas kept his eyes on the warehouse but found himself answering, "Drug bust in Oak Ridge, basement meth lab. Rex was the guard dog, except he wasn't very good at it." A rare smile crossed his face. "Came right to me, terrified of everything else." They were going to put him down? Or ship him to a shelter? Either way. Thomas shrugged. He deserved better. Johnny nodded, then suddenly sat up straighter. Movement, 3 o'clock. Thomas followed his gaze to where a shadow detached itself from the darkness near the warehouse's side entrance. In the green glow of his night vision binoculars, he could make out a figure in dark clothing working on the security panel. "Call it in," Thomas whispered, feeling Rex tense up in the back compartment. Silent alarm requesting backup. Johnny radioed dispatch as Thomas continued to watch the intruder, now joined by 2 more figures. Something about the lead perpetrator's movements seemed familiar. The way he held himself, checked his surroundings, professional, military-like. As Johnny finished the call, Thomas felt a chill run through him. The leader had turned, and for just a moment, his face was illuminated by the security light. "Marcus," he whispered, the name like ash in his mouth. "You know him?" Johnny asked. Thomas nodded grimly. "Marcus Devereaux, former detective. He was fired 2 years ago." What he didn't add was that Marcus had once pulled him from a burning car after a chase gone wrong, had been best man at his wedding to Caroline, had held Thomas up at her funeral when his knees threatened to buckle. "What's the play?" Johnny asked, hand hovering near his service weapon. Thomas watched as the 3 men slipped inside the warehouse. "We wait for backup, 2 minutes out." But 1 minute later, a 4th figure emerged from the shadows, someone they hadn't seen arrive, and entered the warehouse. Thomas felt his stomach drop. Change of plans. Something's wrong. He reached back and released Rex's compartment. "We're going in. Stay close. Call in our position." They approached silently, Rex padding ahead, alert but quiet. At the side entrance, Thomas could see the security panel had been expertly bypassed. He drew his weapon, gave Johnny a nod, and they entered. The warehouse interior was a maze of high shelves stocked with pharmaceuticals. Through the dim emergency lighting, Thomas could make out movement at the far end, near the controlled substances cage. Rex's ears were flat against his head, a low growl building in his throat. "Take the left," Thomas whispered to Johnny. "I'll go right with Rex. If you see anything, radio first. Don't engage." They separated, Thomas and Rex moving silently through the shelves. The sound of hushed voices grew louder as they approached the secure area. "You said no one would be here!" A tense whisper Thomas didn't recognize. "Keep your voice down." That was Marcus, unmistakable. "Something's not right. This was too easy. We need to finish and go. Now." Thomas peered around a shelf to see Marcus and two men loading boxes into duffel bags. The fourth figure stood slightly apart, watching. Rex suddenly stiffened, his nose working overtime. Before Thomas could grab his collar, the dog let out a warning bark. Everything happened at once. The men spun around, Marcus's face contorting in shock as he recognized Thomas. One of the other men yanked out a pistol. The fourth figure, whom Thomas now recognized as Wilson, another officer from the precinct, shouted, "Police! Don't move!" A gunshot cracked through the air. Johnny's voice called out from somewhere to the left. More shots. Rex lunged forward, breaking from Thomas's side. "Rex, halt!" Thomas shouted, but the dog was already in motion, targeting the man with the gun. Thomas moved to provide cover, but a searing pain exploded in his shoulder as another shot rang out. He stumbled, firing back instinctively. Through the chaos, he saw Marcus looking straight at him, mouth forming words he couldn't hear over the ringing in his ears. Johnny appeared from the left, returning fire. Thomas saw him jerk backward as a bullet found its mark. The rookie collapsed against a shelf, pharmaceuticals raining down around him. "Officer down!" Thomas shouted into his radio, trying to make his way to Johnny while keeping pressure on his own wound. "Repeat. Officer down at Medicorp warehouse." Rex had taken down one of the gunmen and was circling back toward Thomas, blood matting the fur on his flank. The German shepherd's eyes were locked on his master, unwavering loyalty even in chaos. The last thing Thomas remembered before darkness claimed him was Rex's warm body pressing against his side, the dog's muzzle nudging his face, and Marcus Devereaux kneeling beside him saying something that looked like, "I'm sorry," as sirens wailed in the distance. Thomas woke briefly in the ambulance, the world a blur of pain and flashing lights. He thought he heard Rex barking somewhere, tried to call for him but couldn't form the words. A paramedic leaned over him, saying something about blood pressure dropping. Then, nothing. In the chaotic aftermath, no one noticed when Dr. James Devereaux arrived for his shift at Millfield Memorial's emergency department. No one questioned when he took personal interest in the two officers brought in with gunshot wounds, and certainly no one suspected anything when identification errors were made in the rush to save lives. Sandra Reynolds was pulling weeds from her small garden when the phone rang. She straightened slowly, her arthritic joints protesting the movement, and wiped her hands on her gardening apron. The California sun beat down on her silver hair as she made her way inside, wondering who would be calling in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon. "Mrs. Reynolds?" The unfamiliar voice on the other end was formal, hesitant. "This is Chief Parker from the Millfield Police Department in Virginia." Sandra's hand went to her throat. In her 68 years, she'd received exactly one call like this before, 30 years ago when Thomas's father had been killed. The chief's next words confirmed her worst fear. "I'm deeply sorry to inform you that your son, Officer Thomas Reynolds, was killed in the line of duty last night." The world tilted. Sandra gripped the kitchen counter, her vision blurring. She was vaguely aware of the chief continuing to speak, something about a warehouse robbery, gunfire exchanged, heroic actions. The words washed over her without meaning. "His dog," she interrupted, the question coming from nowhere. "What about his dog?" A pause on the line. "Rex was wounded but will recover. He's been inconsolable." Sandra nodded, though no one could see her. "That makes two of us," she whispered. Within hours, she was on a plane to Virginia, clutching her purse with white-knuckled hands. Inside was Thomas's last birthday card to her, the one where he'd promised to visit soon to take her to see the fall colors in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Promises now permanently broken. As the plane descended toward Richmond, Sandra found herself struggling to recall the sound of Thomas's laugh. Had it been 3 months since their last phone call? 4? The gaps in her memory, which her doctor had gently suggested were early signs of Alzheimer's, terrified her now. What if she forgot him completely? Officer Wilson met her at the airport, his expression appropriately somber as he loaded her single suitcase into the patrol car. "We're all heartbroken, Mrs. Reynolds. Thomas was one of our best." Sandra nodded, unable to speak. The drive to Millfield passed in a blur of unfamiliar landscape and unwanted memories. Thomas as a solemn-eyed boy at his father's funeral. Thomas in his academy graduation uniform. Thomas holding Caroline's hand at their small wedding. "Where is he?" she finally asked, as they entered the town limits. "Millfield Memorial. The funeral home will—" "Afterward." Wilson cleared his throat. "The department is covering all expenses. Full honors." At the hospital, Sandra was led to a small administrative office where a sympathetic woman with a clipboard asked questions about funeral arrangements. Did she want an open or closed casket? Did Thomas have a uniform he preferred? Any specific religious considerations? "Closed," Sandra said firmly. She couldn't bear to see him like that. "But I want to see him now, before anything else." The woman exchanged glances with Wilson. "Mrs. Reynolds, I'm not sure that's advisable. The injuries—" "He's my son," Sandra interrupted, her voice steel beneath the grief. "I need to see him." They relented, escorting her down sterile corridors to the hospital morgue. The cold hit her first as they entered, an unnatural chill that seemed to seep into her bones. A sheet-covered form lay on a metal table. "Would you like a moment alone?" the morgue attendant asked. Sandra nodded, waiting until the door closed behind them. With trembling fingers, she reached for the edge of the sheet, then stopped. A lifetime of memories flashed before her. Thomas toddling across their living room, skinned knees from his first bicycle crash, awkward teenage years, the proud set of his shoulders in his police uniform. She couldn't do it. Couldn't replace all those memories with this final, terrible image. Sandra withdrew her hand and placed it instead on what would be his chest through the sheet. "I'm sorry we wasted so much time," she whispered. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you about the diagnosis. I didn't want to be a burden." The silence of the morgue was her only answer. Back in the administrative office, Sandra signed papers with mechanical precision. When asked about personal effects, she looked up. "What about Rex? Thomas would want him taken care of." Officer Wilson shifted uncomfortably. "He's with me for now, but he's not doing well. Won't eat, barely sleeps. Keeps trying to run back to the hospital every chance he gets." "Bring him to me," Sandra said suddenly. "I'm staying at Thomas's house while I arrange everything. Rex should be there too." That evening, Wilson brought the German Shepherd to Thomas's bungalow. Sandra had used the spare key Thomas had mailed her years ago, entering the house that was both familiar and strange. She'd visited only twice in the past decade. Everything was neat but lived in. A coffee mug in the sink, a jacket hung by the door, Caroline's photograph on the mantel beside one of Thomas as a boy with his father. Rex entered cautiously, his intelligent eyes scanning the room. When he saw Sandra, there was a moment of recognition. He'd met her during those brief visits. But then he moved past her, sniffing the air, checking each room as if searching for someone. "He does this at my place too," Wilson explained. "Checks every room for Thomas, then goes back to the door to wait." Sandra felt tears welling up. "He doesn't understand. I'm not sure he ever will, ever. These working dogs, their handlers are their whole world." After Wilson left, Sandra sat on the couch while Rex continued his patrol of the house, finally settling by the front door, his head on his paws but eyes alert, waiting. "He's not coming back," she told the dog gently. "I wish he was, but he's not." Rex's ears twitched at her voice, but his position didn't change. Sandra eventually retired to the guest room, leaving the dog at his post. In the middle of the night she woke to howling, a sound so mournful it raised goosebumps on her arms. She found Rex at the back door now, pawing frantically, that terrible sound emanating from deep in his chest. "Shh, boy," she soothed, kneeling beside him despite her aching joints. "You'll wake the neighbors." But Rex was inconsolable, switching between howling and barking, scratching at the door until his paws left bloody marks on the wood. On impulse, Sandra opened the door. Immediately, Rex bolted into the backyard and toward the fence, clearing it in a single bound despite his injured flank. "Rex!" Sandra called, but the dog vanished into the darkness. She called Wilson in a panic, and within minutes patrol cars were searching the neighborhood. They found Rex 2 hours later at the hospital trying to force his way through the emergency entrance. "It's not unusual," the veterinarian explained the next morning after checking Rex's reopened wound. "Dogs don't understand death the way we do. He's looking for Thomas." "Can I bring him to the funeral?" Sandra asked. "Would that help him understand?" The vet hesitated. "It might. Some handlers do that with retired canines. But be prepared, it might upset him more." The next 3 days passed in a fog of funeral arrangements, condolence calls, and memories that ambushed Sandra at every turn. She found Thomas's high school yearbook in a box under his bed, his fishing tackle in the garage. A birthday card she'd sent him 2 years ago, saved in his desk drawer. Each night, Rex would eventually give up his post by the door and come to lie at the foot of her bed, his eyes watching her as if she might disappear too. The morning of the funeral dawned clear and warm, a beautiful Virginia spring day that seemed an affront to the occasion. Sandra dressed in the black suit she'd packed, her fingers fumbling with unfamiliar buttons as the fog in her mind thickened. For a terrifying moment, she couldn't remember what she was doing or why she was in this strange house. Then Rex padded into the room, nudging her hand with his nose, and reality crashed back with devastating clarity. "We have to say goodbye today," she told the dog, who tilted his head as if trying to understand her words. The funeral service was scheduled for 2 o'clock at Millfield's oldest church, a white clapboard building with a bell tower that had called the faithful for over a century. By 1:30, the parking lot was filled with patrol cars, their lights off, but their presence a silent tribute. Sandra sat in the front pew, Rex beside her on a leash held by Officer Wilson. The closed casket before them was draped with an American flag, Thomas's service photo placed on a stand nearby. It was a good picture. He looked serious, but there was a hint of the smile that had become so rare after Caroline's death. As mourners filed in, many stopped to offer condolences to Sandra and Pat Rex, who remained unnaturally still, his focus entirely on the casket. Chief Parker delivered a eulogy that painted Thomas as a dedicated officer, a loyal friend, a man of few words but deep integrity. Sandra listened, grateful for the kind words but aching for all the things left unsaid, how Thomas had been afraid of thunderstorms as a boy, how he'd once rescued a nest of baby rabbits from their flooding yard, how he'd read poetry in secret. Throughout the service, Rex grew increasingly restless. At first, it was just the occasional whine, quickly hushed by Wilson, but as the pastor began the final prayer, the German shepherd's behavior escalated dramatically. He began to bark, sharp, insistent sounds that echoed through the church's vaulted ceiling. "Rex, quiet," Wilson commanded, tightening his grip on the leash. But Rex wasn't listening. He lunged toward the casket, nearly pulling Wilson off the pew. The barking intensified, becoming frantic, desperate. The pastor faltered in his prayer. Mourners shifted uncomfortably. Sandra felt a mixture of embarrassment and sympathy as Wilson struggled to control the agitated dog. "Maybe you should take him outside," she whispered. Wilson nodded, red-faced, and began to lead Rex toward the exit. But halfway down the aisle the dog broke free, racing back to the casket and circling it, barking and growling as if it contained not Thomas's body, but some terrible threat. "Someone get that animal under control," the funeral director hissed from the side of the room. Two officers moved to help Wilson, who had recaptured the leash but couldn't pull Rex away. The dog was fixated on the casket, pawing at it now, whining between barks. Sandra watched the scene unfold with growing unease. Rex had been devoted to Thomas, yes, but this went beyond grief. This was alarm. "Wait!" she called out, rising from her seat. "Just wait!" She approached the casket slowly, the officers and Rex pausing to watch her. The German shepherd's eyes met hers, and Sandra felt a chill that had nothing to do with the church's air conditioning. "Open it," she said suddenly, the words surprising even her. The funeral director stepped forward, aghast. "Mrs. Reynolds, I don't think—" "Open the casket," she repeated, her voice stronger. "Please, I need to see my son." A murmur ran through the assembled mourners. Chief Parker approached, concern etched on his weathered face. "Sandra, you chose a closed casket for a reason. The damage was extensive." But Sandra stood firm, her hand finding Rex's head. The dog had quieted somewhat at her approach but still trembled with tension, his eyes never leaving the casket. "Thomas told me once that Rex never barks without reason," she said quietly. "I need to see him." Now, after a moment of tense silence, Chief Parker nodded to the funeral director. "Do as she asks." The funeral director hesitated, then signaled to his assistants. The church fell silent except for the soft footfalls of the men approaching the casket and the low whine still emanating from Rex's throat. Sandra stood perfectly still, one hand buried in the German shepherd's fur, drawing strength from his solid presence. As the funeral home workers prepared to open the casket, Officer Wilson approached Sandra. "Are you sure about this?" he whispered. "Thomas wouldn't want you to remember him this way." Sandra kept her eyes on the casket. "I need to know," she replied simply. The casket lid was raised slowly, with reverence. Sandra steeled herself for the sight of her son's damaged face, for the finality that would come with seeing him. But as the lid settled back, a collective gasp rose from those close enough to see inside. Sandra stepped forward, Rex moving with her, and looked down. The world tilted beneath her feet. The man in the casket was not Thomas. "That's not my son," she whispered, gripping the edge of the casket to steady herself. "That's not Thomas." The face, though partially reconstructed, clearly belonged to a younger man. Officer Johnny Miller lay in Thomas's place, dressed in Thomas's dress uniform, his features peaceful in eternal sleep. Chaos erupted in the church. Chief Parker rushed forward, his face ashen. Officers crowded around the casket, exclaiming in shock. Someone was calling for silence, for order, but the revelation had unleashed a torrent of confusion that couldn't be contained. Rex had calmed the moment the casket opened, sitting beside Sandra with what could only be described as vindication in his intelligent eyes. He'd known all along. "How is this possible?" Chief Parker demanded, though no one present had an answer. How could such a mistake be made? Sandra's mind raced through fog. If this was Johnny in the casket, then where was Thomas? A spark of hope, dangerous and fragile, flickered to life in her chest. "My son," she said, her voice cutting through the din. "Where is my son?" The funeral was abruptly postponed. Police officers transformed instantly from mourners to investigators, the church becoming an impromptu command center. Chief Parker was on the phone with the hospital administrator, his voice rising with each exchange. "How do you misidentify two officers?" he demanded. "One is 28, the other 42. Sandra sat in a pew, Rex's head in her lap as the investigation unfolded around her. Officer Wilson brought her water, his expression a mixture of confusion and hope. "If there was a mix-up," he said carefully, "if Thomas isn't—" He couldn't finish the sentence, as if speaking the possibility aloud might jinx it. Sandra nodded, understanding. "We need to go to the hospital, now." The convoy that arrived at Millfield Memorial consisted of 4 police cruisers and Sandra in the passenger seat of Thomas's personal truck, which Wilson had retrieved from the station parking lot. Rex sat in the back seat, more alert than he'd been in days, his ears perked forward as if sensing the mission's importance. The hospital administrator met them in the lobby, flanked by security and looking distinctly uncomfortable. "Chief Parker, we're conducting our own internal investigation into this matter." "Where is Officer Thomas Reynolds?" Parker interrupted. "We have reason to believe he may be in your facility, alive, under another name." The administrator blanched. "Let me check our records immediately. Please, come to my office." As they followed him through the hospital corridors, Sandra felt as though she were moving through a dream. The hope that had sparked in the church now burned brighter, though she tried to temper it. Hospital mix-ups happened, but they were usually about medication or test results, not identities, not life and death. In the administrator's office, records were pulled up on a computer. "We admitted 2 officers that night," he confirmed. "One died during surgery, identified as Thomas Reynolds. The other suffered severe head trauma but stabilized, identified as Jonathan Miller. He's currently in a medically induced coma in the ICU. We need to see him," Sandra said immediately. "Now." The administrator hesitated. "Mrs. Reynolds, I understand your hope, but hospital policy regarding the ICU—" Rex chose that moment to let out a single sharp bark that made everyone in the room jump. "I believe what my K-9 officer is trying to say," Chief Parker translated dryly, "is that your hospital has already made one catastrophic error. Do you really want to compound it by refusing this request?" Minutes later, they were being escorted to the ICU, though the administrator insisted that only Sandra and Chief Parker could enter. Rex would have to wait outside with Officer Wilson. "Hospital regulations," the administrator explained apologetically. "No animals in the ICU." Sandra knelt beside Rex, looking into his amber eyes. "Wait here, boy. I'll find him." The ICU was a hushed world of beeping monitors and subdued lighting. Sandra's heart pounded as they were led to a room at the end of the hall. Through the glass partition, she could see a still figure in the bed, face obscured by bandages and an oxygen mask, monitors tracking heartbeat and brain activity in glowing lines. "The patient has been in a coma since admission," the ICU doctor explained. "The head trauma was severe, but he's showing promising signs of brain activity." Sandra approached the bed slowly. The man's head was heavily bandaged, his face swollen and discolored from trauma, but his hands, she would know those hands anywhere. Thomas had his father's hands, broad-palmed with long fingers, the small scar on the right thumb from a fishing accident when he was 12. "It's him," she whispered, reaching out to touch his arm. "It's Thomas." Chief Parker stepped closer, examining the unconscious officer. "My God," he murmured. "How did this happen?" The doctor looked bewildered. "His ID? All his paperwork says Jonathan Miller." "Well, his paperwork is wrong," Sandra said firmly, pulling a chair close to the bed and sitting down. "This is my son, Thomas Reynolds." While Chief Parker stepped outside to make calls and set an investigation in motion, Sandra remained by Thomas's side, holding his hand. She talked to him softly, telling him about Rex waiting outside, about the house she'd been keeping for him, about all the things they would do when he recovered. "The Blue Ridge Mountains in fall," she promised. "Just like you said in your last card." A noise at the door made her look up. Officer Wilson stood there, his expression urgent. "Mrs. Reynolds, I'm sorry to interrupt, but Rex is going crazy out here. He can smell Thomas. He knows. He's about to tear this place apart if we don't let him in." Sandra looked to the ICU doctor, who was already shaking his head. "Absolutely not. The risk of infection—" "That dog figured out what an entire hospital and police department couldn't," Sandra interrupted. "He's earned the right to see his partner." After a tense standoff and intervention from Chief Parker, a compromise was reached. Rex would be allowed a brief visit, provided he was freshly bathed with antiseptic shampoo by the hospital's on-call veterinarian and fitted with sterile booties. 2 hours later, a damp but dignified Rex was escorted into Thomas's ICU room. The German Shepherd approached the bed cautiously, sniffing the air. When he reached the bedside, he stretched his neck forward, nose twitching as he investigated the scent of his unconscious partner. Then, with the gentleness of a mother with her newborn, Rex rested his muzzle on the edge of the bed and exhaled a soft whine. His tail gave a single tentative wag. "He knows," Sandra whispered, tears streaming down her face. "He's found him." The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Hospital security footage confirmed that Dr. James Devereaux had been on duty the night Thomas and Johnny were brought in. The doctor had mysteriously taken a family emergency leave immediately afterward and was nowhere to be found. DNA testing confirmed what Rex and Sandra already knew. The man in the ICU was indeed Thomas Reynolds. The hospital's records had been deliberately altered. Identification switched between the two officers. As the investigation deepened, connections to the warehouse robbery emerged. Marcus Devereaux's fingerprints had been found at the scene, and security footage showed him with the other perpetrators. What remained unclear was why anyone would want to switch the identities of the two wounded officers. Sandra barely left Thomas's side, sleeping in the chair beside his bed. Rex was granted special permission to visit twice daily, and hospital staff noted that Thomas's vital signs improved noticeably during these visits. 5 days after the funeral, that wasn't, Sandra was dozing in her chair when a soft sound woke her. Rex, who had been permitted an evening visit, was standing at attention, ears forward, eyes fixed on Thomas's face. "What is it, boy?" Sandra whispered, leaning forward to look at her son. Thomas's eyelids were fluttering. His fingers twitched in her grasp. "Doctor!" Sandra called out, her heart racing. "He's waking up!" The medical team rushed in, checking monitors and speaking in the clipped, efficient language of emergency medicine. Rex refused to be moved from his position, watching intently as Thomas's eyes opened fully for the first time in over a week. "Thomas?" Sandra leaned into his field of vision. "Can you hear me?" His eyes, so like his father's, focused slowly on her face. Confusion gave way to recognition. He tried to speak but couldn't around the breathing tube. "Don't try to talk," the doctor instructed, checking his pupils. "You're in the hospital. You've been in a coma." Thomas's gaze moved from Sandra to Rex, who had inched closer, tail wagging tentatively. A tear slipped from the corner of Thomas's eye as he weakly lifted his hand toward the dog. Rex gently licked his fingers, then looked up at the doctor as if to say, "See? I told you so." Later that evening, after the breathing tube had been removed and Thomas had been evaluated by what felt like every specialist in the hospital, Sandra sat beside him as he drifted between wakefulness and sleep. "Rex knew," she told him during one of his lucid moments. "He knew it wasn't you in that coffin. He wouldn't stop barking until they opened it." Thomas managed a weak smile. "Good boy," he whispered hoarsely, his hand resting on the German Shepherd's head. "Best partner." "Do you remember what happened?" Sandra asked carefully. Thomas's brow furrowed. "Warehouse, gunfire. Johnny was hit. Rex." His eyes flew to the dog, suddenly alarmed. "Rex was bleeding." "He's fine," Sandra assured him. "Just a graze. He's been more worried about you." Relief washed over Thomas's face. Then confusion returned. They said, Johnny died? Sandra nodded sadly. Yes, and somehow your identities were switched. Everyone thought you were the one who died. Thomas was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Marcus, he finally said. Marcus Devereaux was there. He said something to me before I passed out. The police are looking for him, Sandra confirmed. His brother was the doctor who switched your records. They think it was deliberate. Thomas's eyes drifted closed, exhaustion claiming him again, but before he slipped back into sleep, he murmured, he said he was sorry, that it wasn't supposed to be me. As her son slept, Sandra contemplated these words, wondering what they meant. Outside the hospital room, the investigation continued, piecing together a puzzle that grew more complex by the day. But here, in this quiet room with her son and his faithful dog, Sandra felt a peace she hadn't known in years. Thomas was alive. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Thomas's recovery progressed slowly but steadily. Each day brought small victories, sitting up unassisted, completing full sentences, remembering more details about the night at the warehouse. Rex remained a constant presence, either curled at Sandra's feet during visiting hours or waiting patiently at home, always at the door when they returned. 2 weeks after Thomas regained consciousness, Chief Parker requested a formal interview. The investigation had stalled without Thomas's testimony, and the chief was under pressure from the mayor and the FBI, who had joined the case due to the pharmaceutical theft component. "Are you up for this?" Sandra asked, adjusting Thomas's pillows as the chief settled into the visitor's chair. Rex lay in his now customary spot in the corner, watchful eyes tracking every movement in the room. Thomas nodded, his face still pale but his eyes clearer than they had been. "I need to remember," he said. "For Johnny." Chief Parker started the recording device and began with simple questions. Thomas's recollection of the stakeout, entering the warehouse, the initial confrontation. Thomas answered methodically, pausing occasionally to search his memory. "You mentioned seeing Marcus Devereaux at the scene," Parker prompted. "Can you elaborate on that?" Thomas's brow furrowed. "He was leading the operation, had 2 men with him, but there was someone else, a 4th person who arrived separately." "Officer Wilson," Parker supplied. "He's confirmed he was there on a separate undercover assignment tracking the same ring. Poor communication between departments. He thought you were part of the robbery at first." Thomas shook his head slowly. "No, not Wilson. Someone else entered after we did. I never saw their face." A heavy silence filled the room. Parker exchanged glances with Sandra, who had gone very still. "Thomas," the chief said carefully, "the only officers on scene were you, Johnny, and Wilson, according to all reports." "Then the reports are wrong," Thomas insisted, becoming agitated. "There was someone else. They came in after us from the loading dock side." Parker made a note. "We'll review the security footage again. What else do you remember?" Thomas described the gunfire erupting, Johnny being hit, Rex charging one of the gunmen. "I was shot in the shoulder," he continued. "Went down. The last thing I remember clearly is Rex coming back to me and Marcus kneeling beside me." "Devereaux approached you after you were wounded?" Parker leaned forward intently. "Yes," he said. Thomas closed his eyes, concentrating. "He said, 'This wasn't meant for you. I'm sorry.' Then nothing until I woke up here." Parker's pen scratched across his notepad. "That's significant. Suggests the operation had a specific target." "Johnny," Thomas said quietly. "It was Johnny they wanted." "Why would anyone target a rookie officer?" Sandra asked, bewildered. Thomas turned to face her. "Remember I told you Johnny had been asking questions, following me around. I thought he was just eager to learn, but what if he was investigating something?" Parker's expression turned grave. "We found something in Miller's apartment yesterday, hidden in a vent behind his bathroom mirror. Thumb drive with encrypted files. Tech team is still working on it, but preliminary review shows he was building a case against someone in the department." The implications settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Rex sensed the tension, rising to his feet and padding over to Thomas's bedside, nudging his hand. "Corruption," Thomas said, absently stroking Rex's ears. "Internal affairs?" Parker shook his head. "No official investigation. He was doing this on his own." "And got killed for it," Thomas concluded grimly. The conversation was interrupted by a nurse entering to check Thomas's vitals. She frowned at his elevated heart rate and blood pressure. "That's enough for today," she announced firmly. "My patient needs rest." Parker nodded, gathering his notes. "We'll continue tomorrow. In the meantime, I'm posting an officer outside your door. Until we know exactly what we're dealing with, we're taking no chances." After he left, Sandra helped Thomas settle back against his pillows. "You should sleep," she urged, noting the lines of pain etched around his eyes. "Can't," he admitted. "Keep thinking about Johnny. He was just a kid, Mom. Bought his first house. Had his whole life ahead of him." "I know," Sandra said softly, taking his hand. "It's not fair." Thomas looked at her, really looked at her for the first time since waking up. "You're different," he observed. "Something's changed." Sandra hesitated. She'd been waiting for the right moment to tell him about her diagnosis, but with everything else happening, it had seemed selfish to add her problems to his burden. "It's nothing," she deflected. "Just worried about you." Thomas held her gaze, unconvinced. "Mom, what aren't you telling me?" Before she could answer, Rex suddenly lifted his head, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Both Thomas and Sandra turned to see what had triggered the dog's alert response. A nurse they didn't recognize stood in the doorway, a medication tray in her hands. "Time for your evening meds," she announced brightly, stepping into the room. Rex's growl deepened, his hackles rising. The nurse faltered slightly but continued forward. "I don't think my son's regular nurse left any instructions about evening medication," Sandra said, rising from her chair. "New orders from Dr. Weston," the nurse replied smoothly, reaching for the IV line. Thomas's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. "Where's Officer Hammond?" he demanded, referring to the police guard Parker had mentioned. A flicker of something, alarm, crossed the nurse's face. "Taking a coffee break. Asked me to tell you." Rex was fully alert now, his body tense as a bowstring, teeth bared. Sandra had never seen the normally composed dog so aggressive. "Rex, guard," Thomas commanded, his voice stronger than it had been in days. The German shepherd immediately positioned himself between the bed and the nurse, his warning growl now a continuous rumble. "Call security," Thomas told Sandra, not taking his eyes off the nurse. "Now!" Sandra backed toward the door, reaching for the call button on the wall. The nurse's pleasant demeanor vanished. "That won't be necessary," she said coldly, dropping the medication tray. Her hand went to her pocket. Thomas yanked the IV from his arm in one fluid motion, ignoring the pain that flashed across his face. "Rex, take!" The command unleashed the German shepherd, who lunged forward with military precision, clamping his powerful jaws around the woman's forearm as she withdrew what looked like a syringe. She screamed, the syringe clattering to the floor. The commotion brought hospital security running, followed by Officer Hammond, who appeared from around the corner looking confused and slightly unsteady on his feet. "She drugged you," Thomas accused as the security team restrained the fake nurse, Rex maintaining his hold until Thomas called him off. Hammond shook his head, trying to clear it. "Coffee. She brought me coffee." Within an hour, the hospital room had transformed into an extension of the police station. The woman, who carried no identification, was taken into custody. The syringe contents were rushed to the lab for analysis. Chief Parker personally interviewed every staff member on the floor, while a forensic team swept Thomas's room. Potassium chloride, Parker reported grimly when the preliminary lab results came in. Would have stopped your heart instantly, made it look like natural causes, a complication from your injuries. Thomas sat on the edge of his bed, now dressed in regular clothes instead of a hospital gown. He'd insisted on getting up after the attack, refusing to lie there vulnerable. Sandra hovered nearby, her face ashen. "Someone doesn't want me remembering what I saw," Thomas concluded. "Or talking about what Johnny found," Parker added. "This goes deeper than Marcus Devereaux and his pharmacy heists." "I want to see that thumb drive," Thomas insisted. Parker hesitated. "You're still recovering." "Johnny died for whatever's on that drive," Thomas cut him off. "And someone just tried to kill me too. I'm involved whether you want me to be or not." The chief considered this, then nodded slowly. "I'll have a copy brought here. But you don't leave this room, and you don't work alone. Double security detail at all times." After Parker left to make arrangements, Sandra sat beside Thomas on the bed. Rex lay at their feet, still alert despite the excitement of the past hour. "You could have died," she said quietly. "Again." Thomas took her hand, "But I didn't. Thanks to Rex." He scratched behind the dog's ears. "Good boy. Best partner." Sandra watched the gentle interaction between man and dog, marveling at the bond between them. Then, making a decision, she straightened her shoulders. "I need to tell you something," she began. "Something I should have told you months ago." Thomas looked up, concern creasing his brow. "I have early-stage Alzheimer's," she said simply, the words feeling both terrible and liberating as they left her mouth. "That's why I came alone for your funeral. I didn't want anyone to notice the symptoms." Thomas stared at her, shock evident in his features. "How long have you known?" 6 months. The doctor says it's progressing slowly, but—" She swallowed hard. "I'm afraid of forgetting you, of forgetting your father. All the important things." Thomas pulled her into a careful embrace, mindful of his healing wounds. "You should have told me," he murmured against her hair. "I didn't want to be a burden," she admitted. "You have your own life, your work." Thomas drew back, looking into her eyes. "You're my mother. You could never be a burden." The simple declaration broke something open inside Sandra, and tears she'd been holding back for months spilled down her cheeks. Thomas held her while she cried, Rex pressing his warm body against both their legs in silent support. When her tears subsided, Thomas spoke again. "When this is over, we need to talk about the future, about where you'll live." Sandra wiped her eyes. "I don't want to disrupt your life." "My life got pretty thoroughly disrupted when someone declared me dead," Thomas said dryly. "I think we're due for some changes anyway." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Officer Wilson entered, carrying a sealed evidence bag containing a laptop. "Chief Parker sent me with this," he explained, setting up the computer on the rolling hospital table. "The tech team unlocked the drive. Said to tell you they made a copy first, so don't worry about messing anything up." As Wilson worked to connect the laptop, Thomas studied him thoughtfully. "You were first on scene after the shooting, right?" Wilson nodded, not looking up from the computer. "Yeah, heard the call go out, was only a few blocks away." "And you were the one who found Johnny?" "Yes." Wilson's hands stilled momentarily. "He was already gone. Nothing anyone could have done." Thomas exchanged a glance with Sandra, who had picked up on his suddenly pointed questions. "And me? Did you find me too?" "You were unconscious, but breathing. Rex was going crazy, wouldn't let anyone near you until animal control showed up with a tranquilizer." Thomas absorbed this information, one hand absently finding Rex's head. "Strange that I don't remember you there." Wilson finally looked up, his expression unreadable. You were pretty out of it. Lost a lot of blood. There, he said, pushing the laptop toward Thomas. All set up. The files are organized by date. Thomas nodded his thanks, and Wilson retreated to the door. I'll be outside if you need anything. As the door closed behind him, Sandra leaned close to Thomas. You suspect him of something? I don't know yet, Thomas replied quietly. But he's been very helpful since I woke up. Almost too helpful. Together they began exploring Johnny's files. The rookie had been methodical, creating folders for different aspects of his investigation. Financial records, personnel files, surveillance notes, photographs. He was building a case against the drug task force, Thomas realized, scanning through documents. Looks like he suspected they were skimming drugs from evidence, then staging pharmacy robberies to cover the missing inventory. Sandra pointed to a name that appeared repeatedly. Captain Davis. Isn't he head of narcotics? Thomas nodded grimly. And Marcus Devereaux's former partner, before Marcus was fired for corruption. They continued through the files, the picture becoming clearer with each document. Johnny had traced suspicious financial transactions, photographed meetings between officers and known drug dealers, documented discrepancies in evidence logs. This is why they killed him, Thomas said softly. He had enough to bring down half the narcotics division. The final folder contained audio files, each labeled with a date. Thomas clicked on the most recent one, recorded the day before the warehouse stakeout. Johnny's voice filled the room, slightly tinny through the laptop speakers. I'm meeting with Reynolds tomorrow, going to tell him everything. He's the only one I trust in the department. If anything happens to me, all this evidence goes to Internal Affairs and the FBI. Thomas sat back, stunned. He was coming to me. That's why he was so eager to partner up for the stakeout. But he never got the chance to tell you, Sandra concluded. They made sure of that. A soft knock interrupted them. Chief Parker entered, his expression grave. Just got a call from Richmond PD. They found Marcus Devereaux. Thomas tensed. Alive? Parker shook his head. Dead. Gunshot wound to the head. Made to look like suicide, but me says the angle's wrong. They're cleaning house, Thomas said, looking back at the laptop screen. Eliminating anyone who knows the truth. And you're next on their list, Sandra added, fear evident in her voice. Thomas reached for her hand, then looked up at Parker. Chief, we need to talk about Captain Davis and the drug task force. Chief Parker's face hardened as Thomas and Sandra walked him through Johnny's evidence. The older man's normally stoic expression gave way to shock, then anger, and finally a cold determination as the full scope of the corruption became clear. Half my narcotics division, he muttered, shaking his head. Right under my nose. Not your fault, Thomas said. They were careful. Professional. Parker ran a hand over his face. Davis has been with the department for 20 years. I promoted him myself. The chief paced the small hospital room, his mind visibly working through the implications. Rex watched him from his position at Thomas's feet, the German shepherd's intelligent eyes tracking every movement. We need to move carefully here, Parker finally said. Davis has friends in the mayor's office, connections with the state police. If we move too quickly without ironclad evidence, this could all disappear. Johnny's evidence seems pretty solid, Sandra observed. For an internal investigation, yes? For criminal charges? Parker shook his head. Defense attorneys would tear it apart as the work of an overzealous rookie with a vendetta. We need more. Thomas shifted in his bed, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at his healing wounds. What about Marcus? His brother switched our identifications for a reason. Maybe Marcus was working with Johnny. Possible, Parker conceded. Marcus was fired for corruption, but the evidence against him was always circumstantial. Could have been a setup if he was getting too close to the truth. A knock at the door interrupted their discussion. Officer Hammond poked his head in. Chief, Sorry to interrupt, but the hospital administrator is insisting Mr. Reynolds be discharged today. Says they need the bed and he's stable enough for home recovery. Parker frowned. Convenient timing. Too convenient, Thomas agreed. They tried to kill me once in here. Sending me home would make it easier for a second attempt. You can't stay here, Sandra said firmly. It's not safe. Neither is my house, Thomas pointed out. They'll know exactly where to find me. Parker considered this, then nodded decisively. I have a hunting cabin about an hour outside town, off the grid, hard to find unless you know where to look. We'll move you there tonight, quietly. I'll need some things from the house, Sandra began. No, Parker cut her off. Too risky. They might be watching it already. I'll have Officer Wilson collect whatever you need. Thomas and Sandra exchanged a glance. Not Wilson, Thomas said quietly. I'm not sure we can trust him yet. Parker raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. Hammond, then. He's solid. As plans for the transfer were finalized, Sandra stepped out to call her neighbor in California about extending her absence. Left alone momentarily, Thomas pulled Rex closer, drawing comfort from the dog's steady presence. We're in trouble here, boy, he murmured. But we've got each other, right? Rex responded with a soft whine, resting his muzzle on Thomas's knee. The German shepherd hadn't left his side since the attempt on his life, refusing food or rest unless Thomas specifically commanded it. The discharge process moved quickly once set in motion. By nightfall, Thomas was being wheeled out the hospital's service entrance to an unmarked police SUV with tinted windows. Sandra and Rex followed closely, the dog alert for any sign of threat. Officer Hammond drove, with Chief Parker riding shotgun. Thomas, Sandra, and Rex were secured in the back, away from curious eyes. As they pulled away from the hospital, Thomas caught Sandra staring back at the building. "What is it?" he asked softly. She shook her head, a haunted look in her eyes. "Just thinking about how close I came to leaving here, believing you were gone forever." Thomas reached for her hand. "But you didn't." Thanks to Rex. The drive to Parker's cabin took them deep into Virginia's countryside, down progressively smaller roads until they were on little more than a dirt track, winding through dense forest. The cabin itself was rustic but solid, a one-room structure with a small kitchen, a fireplace, and basic furnishings. "It's not much," Parker apologized as he unlocked the door, "but it's defensible. One road in, clear sight lines in all directions." Hammond brought in supplies, groceries, clothing, medications for Thomas, and a bag of Rex's food. Parker conducted a thorough sweep of the perimeter before declaring it secure. "Hammond will stay as your protection," the chief explained. "I need to get back to town, start working on this investigation quietly. The fewer people who know where you are, the better." After final instructions and a promise to check in regularly, Parker departed, leaving Thomas, Sandra, Rex, and Hammond to settle into their temporary sanctuary. The first night passed quietly. Thomas slept fitfully on the cabin's small bed, while Sandra took the couch. Rex positioned himself by the door, his vigilance unwavering. Hammond patrolled the perimeter at regular intervals, professional and thorough. By the second day, a routine had emerged. Sandra prepared simple meals from their supplies. Thomas, still weak but improving, began reviewing copies of Johnny's files that Parker had brought them. Hammond maintained security. Rex divided his attention between guarding the cabin and staying close to Thomas, as if worried his human might disappear again. On the third evening, as a thunderstorm rolled through the mountains, Hammond received a call from Parker. The officer stepped outside onto the covered porch to take it, seeking better reception. Through the window, Thomas could see him pacing, his expression growing more troubled by the moment. When Hammond returned, his face was grim. "Chief says they found Dr. Devereaux, Marcus's brother who switched your IDs, dead in his apartment, made to look like an overdose." "Another cleanup," Thomas said. They're eliminating everyone connected to the case. Sandra shuddered, wrapping her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. How did they find him? I thought he'd disappeared. Apparently, he reached out to Internal Affairs, Hammond explained. Wanted to make a deal. Someone got to him before he could talk. Thomas absorbed this news, connecting it to the growing picture in his mind. They're scared, making mistakes. First the botched attempt at the hospital, now this. Chief says they're accelerating the investigation, Hammond continued. FBI's officially involved now. They're preparing to move on Davis and the others, possibly as soon as tomorrow. Later that night, after Sandra had retired to the couch and Hammond had stepped out for his regular perimeter check, Thomas sat by the fireplace with Rex, contemplating all that had happened. And the German shepherd rested his head on Thomas's lap, occasionally looking up with those intelligent eyes that seemed to understand everything. "What am I missing, Rex?" Thomas whispered, scratching behind the dog's ears. "There's something here we're not seeing." Rex suddenly lifted his head, ears perked forward. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Thomas tensed, instantly alert. "What is it, boy?" The dog rose to his feet, moving silently toward the window. Thomas followed, careful to stay out of sight. Outside, in the glow of the security light, he could see Hammond talking on his phone, his back to the cabin. Nothing unusual there. The officer had been checking in regularly with Parker. But something about his posture, the furtive way he glanced over his shoulder, sent a chill down Thomas's spine. "Rex, stay," Thomas whispered, moving to the small desk where Hammond had left his service weapon while stepping outside. He checked it quickly. Loaded, safety on. The cabin door opened, and Hammond stepped back inside, pocketing his phone. He froze when he saw Thomas standing there, the gun in his hand. "Everything okay?" Hammond asked, his voice carefully neutral. "You tell me," Thomas replied. "Who were you talking to just now?" Hammond's hand drifted toward his empty holster, then stopped when he realized his mistake. "Just checking in with the chief. Reception's better outside." "At midnight?" Thomas kept his voice even. "Try again." A tense silence stretched between them. Rex moved to Thomas's side, hackles raised, a continuous low growl emanating from deep in his chest. "You don't want to do this, Reynolds," Hammond said finally, all pretense gone. "You're still recovering. You're not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking just fine," Thomas countered. "You're working with Davis, aren't you? That's how they knew where to find Dr. Devereaux. That's how they knew when to send that fake nurse." Hammond's expression hardened. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "I think I do. You were first on scene at the warehouse. You found me and Johnny. Perfect opportunity to make sure Johnny didn't survive, to plant the IDs that Dr. Devereaux would later use to switch our identities." "You're confused," Hammond insisted, taking a step forward. "Put the gun down before you do something you'll regret." Rex's growl intensified, stopping Hammond in his tracks. "Who were you just calling?" Thomas demanded. "Davis? His men? Are they on their way here now?" A flicker of something, guilt, fear, crossed Hammond's face. That was all the confirmation Thomas needed. "Sandra," he called, not taking his eyes off Hammond. "Get up. We need to leave. Now." Sandra appeared from the living area, eyes widening at the standoff. "Thomas, what's happening?" "Hammond's with them. We've been compromised." Thomas backed toward the kitchen, keeping the gun trained on Hammond. "Get your coat." "We're leaving." "You won't make it a mile," Hammond said coldly. "They're already on their way, armed. Davis is done playing games." Sandra grabbed her coat and Thomas's, moving with surprising speed and clarity for someone her age. Thomas kept Hammond covered while she collected the essentials: medication, car keys, Johnny's files. "Rex, guard," Thomas commanded. The German shepherd positioned himself between Hammond and Thomas, teeth bared, every muscle tense and ready. "The car keys," Thomas said to Hammond. Toss them here, slowly." Hammond reached into his pocket and extracted a key fob, tossing it onto the floor halfway between them. "You're making a mistake, Reynolds. There's nowhere to run." "Better than waiting here to be executed," Thomas replied. "On your knees, hands behind your head." Once Hammond was secured with his own handcuffs, Thomas, Sandra, and Rex moved quickly to the SUV parked outside. The storm had intensified, rain lashing down in sheets, lightning illuminating the forest in stark flashes. "Can you drive?" Thomas asked Sandra as they reached the vehicle. She nodded, determination overriding the fear in her eyes. "I may forget things, but I've been driving for 50 years. Thomas handed her the keys, then helped Rex into the back seat before climbing into the passenger side, his body protesting every movement. The wound in his shoulder had begun to throb again, a reminder of his still fragile condition. As Sandra started the engine, headlights appeared on the dirt road leading to the cabin, still distant, but approaching fast. "They're here," Thomas said grimly. "We need another way out." Sandra's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Is there another road?" Thomas shook his head. "Not that I know of." He scanned the darkness beyond the cabin, thinking furiously. "There." He pointed to a barely visible trail leading into the forest on the opposite side from the approaching vehicles. "That fire break. It's rough, but it might connect to the logging road on the other side of the ridge." Sandra didn't hesitate. She threw the SUV into drive and accelerated toward the narrow opening in the trees, headlights illuminating a path that was little more than a game trail. "Hold on," she warned as they hit the rough terrain, the vehicle bouncing violently. Rex braced himself in the back seat, eyes fixed on the forest rushing past. Behind them, shouts and the beams of flashlights indicated Hammond had been found, and the pursuers now knew they'd fled. The sound of engines revving echoed through the trees. "They'll be right behind us," Thomas said, checking the handgun's magazine. Only Davis's men would be desperate enough to pursue them through a forest in the middle of a thunderstorm. The next 20 minutes were a nightmare of mud, rain, and near misses as Sandra navigated the treacherous trail with grim determination. Twice they nearly became stuck in mud holes. Once, a fallen tree forced them to backtrack and find another route. All the while, the sounds of pursuit grew closer, then faded, then returned as their hunters adapted to their escape route. Finally, the trees thinned, and they emerged onto a wider gravel road, the logging route Thomas had hoped for. Sandra accelerated, the SUV's tires finding better traction on the more solid surface. "Which way?" she asked, pausing at a junction. Thomas oriented himself, trying to recall the maps of the area he'd studied years ago during a search and rescue operation. "Left. Should take us toward the highway." As they turned, headlights appeared behind them, closing fast. Their pursuers had found the logging road too. "They're going to catch us," Sandra said, her voice remarkably steady. "This SUV isn't built for speed." Thomas made a quick decision. "Pull over up ahead by those trees. Cut the lights." Sandra did as instructed, guiding the vehicle into the shadow of a stand of pines just off the road. They watched as two black SUVs raced past, their drivers assuming Thomas and Sandra had continued straight ahead. "That won't fool them for long," Thomas said. "Once they realize we're not ahead of them, they'll double back." "What do we do now?" Sandra asked, the adrenaline that had carried her this far beginning to ebb, leaving exhaustion in its wake. Thomas checked his phone. No signal, as expected in these remote mountains. "We need to get to the highway, find help, or at least get somewhere with cell reception to call Parker." They continued more cautiously now, headlights off, guided only by the occasional flash of lightning and Sandra's remarkable night vision. Rex remained vigilant in the back seat, head swiveling to track every sound and movement outside the vehicle. The gravel road eventually connected to a paved county route, and Thomas felt a surge of hope. They were heading back toward civilization, toward safety. He reached for his phone again. Still no signal, but they had to be getting closer. "Thomas," Sandra said suddenly, her voice tight. "Look behind us." In the rearview mirror, headlights had appeared again, closing fast, high beams blazing. Their pursuers had realized their mistake and doubled back. "Floor it," Thomas urged. "Get us to the highway." Sandra pressed the accelerator to the floor, the SUV's engine roaring in protest as they sped down the winding road. The pursuing vehicles gained ground with every curve, their more powerful engines designed for exactly this kind of chase. A sharp bend in the road appeared suddenly in their headlights. Sandra braked hard, fighting to maintain control on the rain-slicked asphalt. The SUV fishtailed, then straightened, but their speed had dropped significantly. The headlights behind them grew larger, closer. A spotlight mounted on the lead vehicle's roof swept across their back window, momentarily blinding them. "They're going to force us off the road," Thomas realized. "Sandra, when I tell you, cut the headlights and pull over hard to the right. There's a turnout coming up." Sandra nodded tensely, hands gripping the wheel. Rex sensed the danger, moving into a crouch in the back seat, ready for whatever came next. "Now!" Thomas shouted as they approached the turnout. Sandra killed the lights and wrenched the steering wheel to the right. The SUV skidded onto the gravel turnout, coming to a stop behind a large stand of trees that partially concealed them from the road. The pursuing vehicles shot past, their drivers momentarily confused by the disappearance of their quarry. But Thomas knew it wouldn't last long. "Out," he commanded. "Into the trees. We'll have better chances on foot than trapped in the vehicle." They abandoned the SUV, Sandra helping Thomas navigate the slippery slope down from the turnout into the dense forest below. Rex led the way, his superior night vision and sense of smell guiding them through the darkness. Behind them, they heard the screech of brakes as their pursuers realized they'd been tricked again. Shouts and the beams of powerful flashlights probed the darkness. "This way," Thomas whispered, guiding Sandra deeper into the forest. "There's a river down there. If we can reach it, we can follow it to the ranger station. Should be 5 miles downstream. But 5 miles might as well have been 500 in their current condition." Thomas's wounds had reopened, blood seeping through his shirt. Sandra, despite her determination, was showing signs of exhaustion. Only Rex seemed tireless, circling back to check on them, then forging ahead to scout the path. The sounds of pursuit grew closer. Their hunters knew these woods, were better equipped for this chase. It was only a matter of time before they were found. "Thomas," Sandra said, stopping to catch her breath against a tree trunk. "I can't. I'm slowing you down." "We stay together," Thomas insisted, taking her arm. "No one gets left behind." A flashlight beam cut through the trees nearby, followed by a voice. "Over here! I found their tracks!" Thomas pulled Sandra behind a fallen log, Rex crouching silently beside them. They watched as 2 men in tactical gear moved through the forest less than 30 feet away, weapons drawn. "Davis wants them alive if possible," one said. "Especially the dog. Chief's got a soft spot for that mutt." Thomas froze. "The chief? Parker?" "Yeah, well, accidents happen in the woods," the other replied. "Especially in weather like this." As the men moved past, Thomas's mind raced. Parker was involved. The corruption went all the way to the top. Suddenly, everything made terrible sense. Parker's cabin as a safe house, the perfect isolated location for an ambush. Hammond's behavior, not betrayal, but following orders from his true boss. The careful containment of the investigation. "We've been played from the beginning," Thomas whispered to Sandra. "Parker's working with Davis." The horror of this revelation was still sinking in when Rex suddenly tensed, his attention fixed on something in the darkness beyond their hiding place. A low, warning growl rumbled in his chest. Thomas tightened his grip on the handgun, preparing for discovery. But instead of another tactical team member, a different figure emerged from the trees, Marcus Devereaux, very much alive despite reports of his death. Thomas instinctively raised his gun, but Marcus quickly raised his hands in surrender, his expression urgent rather than threatening. "Don't shoot," he whispered. "I'm here to help." Rex continued growling softly, his body tense between Thomas and the newcomer. Sandra pressed closer to her son, eyes wide with fear and confusion. "You're supposed to be dead," Thomas said, keeping the gun trained on Marcus. "That was the idea," Marcus replied. "Parker's people think they got me in Richmond. It was someone else. Some poor homeless guy with similar build." He grimaced. "They're cleaning house, Reynolds. Anyone who knows anything." "Why should I trust you?" Thomas demanded. "You were behind the warehouse robbery." Marcus shook his head. "Not exactly. Look, we don't have time for the full story. Davis's men are combing these woods and they're good at what they do. I have a vehicle hidden about half a mile from here. I can get you out." As if to emphasize his point, shouts and flashlight beams appeared in the distance, moving methodically in their direction. Thomas hesitated, weighing their options. They were exhausted, injured, and hopelessly outmatched against Davis's tactical team. Yet trusting Marcus seemed equally dangerous. Sandra touched his arm. "Thomas, I think we should go with him. Mom, he came back for you," she interrupted. "At the warehouse. You said he apologized, said it wasn't meant for you." Thomas studied Marcus's face in the dim light. The former detective looked haggard, haunted, but his eyes held a desperate sincerity. "Rex," Thomas said softly. "Check." The German shepherd understood the command immediately. He approached Marcus cautiously, sniffing the man thoroughly, particularly his hands and pockets, searching for weapons, explosives, anything threatening. After a tense moment, Rex returned to Thomas's side, no longer growling. "Good enough for me," Thomas decided, lowering the gun slightly. "Lead the way." Marcus nodded, visibly relieved. "Stay close. Follow exactly where I step." He guided them deeper into the forest, away from the searching tactical team. They moved as quietly as possible, Marcus occasionally stopping to listen or check his bearings. Rex padded silently beside Thomas, while Sandra followed with remarkable resilience despite her exhaustion. True to his word, after about half a mile of difficult terrain, they reached a camouflaged jeep hidden under a canopy of branches and leaves. "Get in," Marcus urged, pulling away the camouflage. "Quickly." Thomas helped Sandra into the back seat, then whistled softly for Rex to join her. The German shepherd leapt in, immediately positioning himself protectively beside Sandra. "You drive," Marcus told Thomas, handing him the keys. "I need to navigate." "You're not worried I'll just turn you in at the first opportunity?" Thomas asked, taking the keys. Marcus's expression was grim. "Right now, I'm more afraid of Davis and Parker than I am of facing charges. At least in custody, I might live long enough for a trial." They pulled away slowly, keeping headlights off until they reached a narrow fire road that Marcus directed them to. The rain had finally stopped, but the roads were still slick with mud and standing water. "Where are we going?" Thomas asked, as they carefully navigated the treacherous path. "I have a place," Marcus replied. "Hunting cabin that belonged to my grandfather, off the grid, not connected to me in any official records. We should be safe there, at least long enough to figure out our next move." "And what exactly is our next move?" Sandra asked from the back seat. "The chief of police is corrupt. Half the department is involved, and they all want us dead." Marcus turned to look at her. "We have something they don't know about. Something that changes everything." "What's that?" Thomas asked, negotiating a particularly deep puddle. "Johnny Miller's complete investigation," Marcus said. "Not just the files on the thumb drive, those were decoys, breadcrumbs. The real evidence is much more comprehensive." Thomas nearly drove off the road in surprise. "What are you talking about?" How do you know about Johnny's investigation? Because I was helping him, Marcus admitted. Had been for months. The revelation hung in the air between them. Thomas struggled to reconcile this with everything he thought he knew about the case. You were fired for corruption, he finally said. Marcus laughed bitterly. That's what they wanted everyone to believe. Perfect cover story. Truth is, I was getting too close to their operation. Davis and Parker set me up, made it look like I was on the take. When I wouldn't go quietly, they threatened my daughter's medical care. Your daughter, Sandra said softly from the back seat, the one with the rare blood disorder. Marcus glanced back at her, surprised. You know about Grace? We did our research, Thomas said. So you backed off to protect her? For a while, Marcus confirmed. Took my termination, played the disgraced cop, but I couldn't let it go. Started my own investigation off the books. That's when Johnny approached me. Said he'd noticed discrepancies in evidence logging, money moving where it shouldn't. You took a rookie under your wing? Thomas sounded skeptical. He came to me, Marcus insisted. Smart kid, figured out I'd been set up. We pooled our resources, built a case slowly, but someone tipped off Davis that Johnny was digging. That's when they planned the warehouse setup. To eliminate Johnny, Thomas concluded. Marcus nodded grimly. The robbery was real enough, but it was also a trap. They knew Johnny had been assigned to you for mentoring. Figured they'd take him out, make it look like a robbery gone bad. But I was there too, Thomas said, and they shot both of us. That wasn't the plan, Marcus said, his voice heavy with regret. You weren't supposed to be there that night. Parker had arranged for you to be called away on another case, but the call never came through. When you showed up with Johnny, everything went sideways. Thomas remembered Marcus's words just before he lost consciousness. This wasn't meant for you. I'm sorry. So you were there to, what, warn Johnny? Thomas asked. To extract him, Marcus corrected. We'd received information that his cover was blown. I was trying to get him out before they could take action. But you were too late, Sandra said softly. Marcus nodded, his expression haunted. Too late for Johnny. And when both of you went down, I had to make a split-second decision. I told my brother to switch your identifications. Why? Thomas demanded. What possible reason? To protect you, Marcus interrupted. If they thought you were dead, you'd be safe while you recovered. James, my brother, was supposed to keep you in a medically induced coma until I could secure things, get you to safety. But he didn't, Thomas said. I woke up. Because James was discovered, Marcus explained. He tried to run, reached out to internal affairs. They got to him before he could talk. His voice broke slightly. My little brother, just trying to help me do the right thing. They drove in silence for several minutes, each processing this new information. The jeep bounced over the rough terrain, heading deeper into the mountains. If what you're saying is true, Thomas finally said, where is this comprehensive evidence Johnny collected? Secure cloud storage, Marcus replied. Encrypted, password protected. Johnny was paranoid, in a good way. Set it up so the files would automatically be sent to the FBI and several news outlets if he didn't enter a special code every 72 hours. But he's been dead for weeks, Sandra pointed out. Why hasn't this evidence already been released? Because I've been entering his code, Marcus explained. Johnny shared it with me as a fail-safe, but we're approaching the next deadline and I can't risk logging in again. They're monitoring everything. Thomas considered this. So in less than 72 hours, everything blows wide open anyway. Why not just hide until then? Because the files won't be enough on their own, Marcus said. We need someone alive to testify, to provide context. Without that, Davis and Parker have enough influence to contain it, discredit it. And you think I'm that someone? Thomas asked. You're a decorated officer with an impeccable record, Marcus pointed out. If you stand up with this evidence, people will listen. Especially when they learn Parker and Davis tried to have you killed. They turned onto an even narrower trail that barely qualified as a road, the jeep struggling over exposed roots and rocks. After another mile of increasingly difficult terrain, a small cabin appeared, nestled against a rocky hillside and surrounded by dense forest. "Here we are," Marcus said. "Home sweet home, at least for now." The cabin was rustic but solid, similar to Parker's but smaller and more neglected. Inside, basic supplies had been stockpiled: food, water, first aid equipment, even weapons. "You've been planning this for a while," Thomas observed as they entered. "Ever since I realized how deep the corruption went," Marcus confirmed. "Needed a fallback position." He gestured to a small generator in the corner. "Limited power, but enough to run essentials. There's a well out back for water." Sandra immediately set about examining Thomas's reopened wounds, using the first aid supplies to clean and re-bandage them. Rex prowled the perimeter of the cabin, exploring every corner before settling into a watchful position by the door. "So, what's the plan?" Thomas asked once they'd settled in. "We can't stay here forever." Marcus spread a map on the small table. "There's a federal prosecutor in Richmond I've been in contact with, Elizabeth Chen. She's been building a case against corrupt officers for years, but hasn't had enough evidence to move against someone as powerful as Parker. With Johnny's files and our testimony, she can get federal warrants, bring in agents from outside the local power structure." "Can we trust her?" Sandra asked, the wariness in her voice reflecting their recent betrayal by Parker. "As much as we can trust anyone at this point," Marcus admitted. "She's given me no reason to doubt her, and her record is spotless. And more importantly, she has the authority to offer witness protection." Thomas exchanged glances with Sandra and Rex. The German Shepherd had moved to sit at attention beside him, as if understanding the gravity of the conversation. "When do we contact her?" Thomas finally asked. "First light," Marcus decided. "There's a spot about 2 miles from here where we can get cell reception. We call her, arrange a meeting point, and she brings federal marshals to escort us safely to Richmond." The plan was simple but solid. They spent the rest of the night recuperating, taking turns keeping watch. Marcus shared more details about the investigation he and Johnny had conducted, revealing a corruption network that extended beyond the police department into local government and even the courts. "It started small," he explained, "skimming a little product from drug busts, selling it back onto the streets. But it grew. Davis got greedy, Parker got involved, and suddenly they were orchestrating fake robberies to cover larger thefts from evidence." "And the profits?" Thomas asked. "Offshore accounts primarily," Marcus replied. "But Davis also bought 3 properties in the Caribbean, and Parker has a yacht he definitely couldn't afford on a chief's salary." As dawn approached, Thomas sat by the window, Rex at his feet. Sandra had finally succumbed to exhaustion and was sleeping on a cot in the corner. Marcus was checking and loading weapons from his stockpile. "Why did you come back for us?" Thomas asked quietly. "You could have just disappeared, stayed dead, until the evidence was released." Marcus paused, considering the question. "Partly guilt," he admitted. "You weren't supposed to be involved in any of this. And partly because of what you did for Grace." Thomas looked up, confused. "What are you talking about? I've never met your daughter." 3 years ago, Marcus said. "The department fundraiser for children's cancer research. You donated $5,000 anonymously, but I saw the transaction record when I was treasurer." Thomas remembered. It had been shortly after Caroline's death from cancer. The donation had been his way of honoring her memory. "That money helped cover Grace's treatments when our insurance maxed out," Marcus continued. "You didn't even know me well then, just a colleague from another division, but you made that donation anyway." Thomas shrugged uncomfortably. "It wasn't about you specifically." "I know," Marcus said. "That's what makes it matter." As the first gray light of dawn filtered through the trees, they prepared to leave. Sandra was refreshed after her rest, and Thomas's wounds, while painful, weren't debilitating. Rex remained vigilant, sensing the importance of their mission. "Remember," Marcus instructed as they loaded into the jeep, "once we make contact with Chen, everything happens fast. We get to the rendezvous, hand over the evidence, give our statements, then witness protection until the trials are over." "Witness protection," Sandra repeated, the reality of what that meant sinking in. "New identities, new location, starting over." Thomas took her hand. "Together this time. All of us." He glanced down at Rex, who sat alert in the back seat beside Sandra. "They'll have to take Rex, too. I won't go without him." Marcus nodded. "I've already discussed it with Chen. Service animals are permitted in witness protection. They'll make an exception for Rex given his role in uncovering the truth." They drove carefully through the morning mist, following logging roads and fire breaks rather than main routes. Marcus directed them to a ridgeline where he promised cell reception would be possible. "Just enough to make a quick call," he explained. "Not long enough to trace." As they neared the location, Thomas noticed Marcus growing increasingly tense, constantly checking the mirrors and scanning the surroundings. "Something wrong?" he asked. "Just being cautious," Marcus replied. "Davis's men are good trackers, and we left a trail at Parker's cabin they could follow." They reached the ridgeline without incident, parking the jeep in a small clearing that offered a view of the valley below. The morning sun had burned away some of the mist, revealing a landscape of endless forest stretching toward distant mountains. Marcus pulled out a burner phone. "This has only been used once. To contact Chen initially. Should be safe." He dialed a number from memory, then put the phone on speaker so everyone could hear. After 3 rings, a clipped professional female voice answered. "Chen." "It's Copperhead," Marcus said, using the code name he'd established with her. "Package is secure." "Repeat, package is secure." A pause, then, "Verification phrase?" "The eagle flies at midnight," Marcus recited. "Confirmed," Chen responded, her tone softening slightly. "Are you all safe?" "For now," Marcus replied, "but we need extraction. The situation has escalated." "Understood. I can have a team at the usual rendezvous point in 3 hours. Can you make it there?" Marcus checked his watch. "We'll be there. Be advised, we have civilians with us. 1 senior, 1 K9. "Noted," Chen said. "I'll bring appropriate transport. Keep this line open for emergency only. See you at the rendezvous." The call ended, and Marcus pocketed the phone. 3 hours to the meeting point. It's about 30 miles from here, mostly back roads. "Will we make it in time?" Sandra asked. "If we leave now and don't hit any complications," Marcus confirmed. As they returned to the jeep, Rex suddenly stiffened, a low growl rumbling in his chest. His focus was fixed on the forest edge about 50 yards away. Thomas followed the dog's gaze but saw nothing. "What is it, boy?" In answer, Rex's growl deepened, his hackles rising. Thomas had learned to trust the German shepherd's instincts implicitly. "Back to the cabin," he said quietly. "Now." "What? Why?" Marcus demanded. "We need to make the rendezvous." "Because we're being watched," Thomas replied, nodding toward Rex's alert posture. "And he's never wrong about these things." Marcus hesitated, then nodded. Back to the jeep. Slowly. They retreated carefully, maintaining a casual pace while scanning the tree line. They had almost reached the vehicle when the first shot rang out, the bullet kicking up dirt at their feet. "Down!" Marcus shouted, drawing his weapon. Thomas pushed Sandra toward the jeep's cover, Rex staying protectively at her side. More shots followed, coming from multiple directions. "They've got us surrounded," Marcus called from behind a boulder. Must have been tracking us all night." Thomas drew his own gun, trying to locate the shooters through the trees. "How many?" "At least 4, maybe more," Marcus replied. "Davis doesn't do anything halfway." A voice called out from the forest edge. "Reynolds, we know you're there. Come out with your hands up and no one else needs to get hurt." Thomas recognized the voice. Captain Davis himself, leading the operation personally. The stakes must be even higher than they'd realized. "What's the play?" Thomas asked Marcus, who was assessing their limited options. "We're outgunned and outmanned," Marcus admitted. "But if we surrender, we're dead anyway." Sandra, crouched behind the jeep's wheel, suddenly spoke up. "The ridge." Both men looked at her. "There's a trail down the backside," she continued, pointing to a barely visible path leading away from the clearing. "I saw it when we drove up. It's steep, but it might give us a way out while they're focused on the road." Thomas and Marcus exchanged glances. It was a desperate plan, but the only one they had. "Cover me," Thomas said. "I'll get Mom and Rex to the trail, then you follow." Marcus nodded grimly. "Go on my signal." He took a deep breath, then fired several rapid shots toward the tree line. "Now!" Thomas grabbed Sandra's arm and whistled for Rex, the three of them staying low as they dashed for the ridge trail while Marcus laid down covering fire. Bullets whistled past them, thudding into trees and kicking up dirt at their feet. "Go! Go!" Thomas urged as they reached the trailhead, a narrow path winding steeply down the rocky hillside. Sandra started down first, Rex close at her heels, the German shepherd instinctively positioning himself to steady her on the treacherous descent. Thomas turned back toward Marcus, who was pinned down behind the boulder as Davis's men intensified their fire. "Marcus!" Thomas called out. "Now!" The former detective made a break for it, zigzagging across the clearing. He'd almost reached the trail when a shot caught him in the leg, sending him sprawling. Without hesitation, Thomas rushed forward, grabbed Marcus under the arms, and dragged him the remaining few yards to the trailhead. "Leave me!" Marcus gasped, his face contorted with pain. "I'll slow you down." "Not happening," Thomas replied firmly, helping him to his feet. "We're all getting out of this together." Supporting Marcus's weight, Thomas guided him down the trail after Sandra and Rex. Behind them, shouts of alarm indicated their escape route had been discovered. The gunfire shifted direction, bullets splintering bark from trees along the ridge trail. "They're following," Sandra called back, pausing to wait for them. "Keep going," Thomas ordered. "We need to put distance between us." The trail was even steeper than it had appeared from above, requiring them to half-climb, half-slide down sections of loose rock and exposed roots. Thomas's wounds screamed in protest as he supported Marcus's weight, but adrenaline kept him moving. Rex stayed with Sandra, helping her navigate the difficult terrain with surprising effectiveness for a dog. "Smart animal," Marcus commented through gritted teeth as they watched Rex guide Sandra around a particularly treacherous section. "Smartest partner I've ever had," Thomas agreed. "You doing okay?" Marcus grimaced. "Been better. Bullet went through, at least. Clean shot." They continued downward, the sounds of pursuit growing more distant as their pursuers struggled with the difficult trail. After what felt like hours but was likely only 20 minutes, they reached the bottom of the ridge, finding themselves in a dense section of forest with a small stream cutting through it. "Which way?" Sandra asked, breathing hard but still remarkably composed. Marcus oriented himself, checking the position of the sun through the canopy. "East. If we follow this stream, it should lead us toward the main road. From there, we can try to find another way to the rendezvous point. Without transportation, we'll never make it in time," Thomas pointed out. "One problem at a time," Marcus replied. "First, we need to get away from here." They followed the stream, moving as quickly as Marcus's injury would allow. Rex ranged ahead and behind, constantly checking for signs of pursuit. The forest provided good cover, but also slowed their progress with dense undergrowth and fallen trees. After nearly an hour of difficult travel, they emerged from the woods onto a narrow country road. No vehicles were in sight, and the pavement was cracked and weathered from years of neglect. "Where are we?" Thomas asked, easing Marcus down to rest on a fallen log. "Somewhere in Jefferson County," Marcus replied, examining his blood-soaked pant leg. "This road eventually connects to Route 29, but that's at least 5 miles from here." Sandra had been unusually quiet during their escape. Now she stood staring down the road, a faraway look in her eyes that alarmed Thomas. "Mom?" he called softly. "You okay?" She turned to him, confusion evident on her face. I'm not sure where we are, or why we're here." Thomas's heart sank. The stress and exertion had triggered an episode of her Alzheimer's. He moved to her side, taking her hand gently. "We're in Virginia, Mom. Remember, we're trying to reach a meeting point to talk to the federal prosecutor." Recognition flickered in her eyes, then solidified. "Of course. I'm sorry. Just got confused for a moment." Rex pressed against her leg supportively, and she absently stroked his head. "Good boy. You've been looking after us, haven't you?" Marcus watched this interaction with concern. "Will she be okay?" "For now," Thomas replied quietly. "But we need to get her somewhere safe. Reduce the stress." A distant engine sound made them all tense. Rex's ears perked up, his body alert as he stared down the road in the direction they had come from. "Into the trees," Marcus urged. "Could be Davis's men." They retreated to the forest edge, concealing themselves behind a screen of vegetation. A black SUV appeared around the bend, moving slowly, the driver clearly searching for something or someone. "It's Hammond," Thomas whispered, recognizing the officer who had betrayed them at Parker's cabin. The SUV stopped almost directly opposite their hiding place. Hammond stepped out, rifle in hand, and scanned the area. His gaze passed over their position without pausing. "Tracks lead this way," he called to someone still in the vehicle. "They can't have gotten far with Devereaux injured." Another man emerged from the passenger side, Captain Davis himself, his craggy face set in lines of cold determination. "Spread out. Check the tree line. That dog will have left a scent trail we can follow." Thomas tensed, one hand instinctively going to Rex's collar to keep him still. The German shepherd remained perfectly quiet, as if understanding the need for absolute silence. More vehicles arrived, disgorging additional officers in tactical gear. Thomas counted at least 8 men, all heavily armed, all looking grim and determined. "They're pulling out all the stops," Marcus whispered. "Must be desperate." "We need a distraction," Thomas replied. "Something to draw them away while we move in the other direction." Marcus considered this, then pulled a lighter from his pocket. "Forest is pretty dry, despite the rain. A fire would certainly get their attention. And potentially trap us too," Thomas pointed out. "Not if we set it between us and them, then circle around while they're dealing with it." It was a risky plan, but they had few options. While Davis and his men spread out to search the immediate area, Marcus carefully gathered dry leaves and twigs, creating a small pile that would ignite quickly. "Wait for my signal," he instructed. "When they focus on the fire, we move. Due east, away from the road. There's an old hunting camp about 2 miles that way. Might have communications equipment, maybe even vehicles." Thomas nodded, positioning himself to support Sandra when they moved. Rex remained vigilantly at their side, his body tense but controlled. Marcus struck the lighter and held the flame to the dry tinder. It caught immediately, flames licking upward and spreading to nearby underbrush. He added more fuel, ensuring the fire would grow quickly, then retreated to join the others. "Now we wait," he whispered. They didn't have to wait long. The smoke attracted attention almost immediately, shouts of alarm rising from the search team. "Fire! East side of the road!" Davis's voice cut through the commotion. "Could be them. Johnson, Taylor, check it out. The rest of you continue the search." "They're trying to distract us." Two men approached the growing fire while the others maintained their search pattern. Not the complete distraction they'd hoped for, but it had thinned the numbers slightly. "Change of plan," Marcus murmured. "We need something bigger." Thomas thought quickly, then turned to Rex. "We can use Rex to lead them away. He's fast enough to escape and smart enough to circle back to us." Sandra shook her head. "It's too dangerous. What if they shoot him?" "They won't," Thomas assured her. "Davis said they wanted him alive. Remember what his men said in the forest? The chief has a soft spot for Rex. Parker wants him back." The fire was spreading now, creating a wall of flame and smoke that partially obscured them from the searchers. It was now or never. Thomas knelt beside Rex, taking the dog's face gently between his hands. "I need you to do something very important," he said softly, knowing the German shepherd understood his tone if not his exact words. "Create a distraction, then circle back to us, east." He pointed in the direction they needed to go. Rex's intelligent eyes locked with his, and Thomas had the uncanny feeling the dog comprehended completely. He removed his jacket and let Rex sniff it thoroughly. "Find me," he instructed. "After you lead them away, find me." With a final pat to Rex's head, Thomas pointed toward the road on the opposite side from their position. "Rex, go!" The German shepherd burst from their hiding place, barking loudly as he dashed across the road in full view of the search team. The reaction was immediate. "The dog! There's the dog!" someone shouted. "Don't shoot!" Davis commanded. "Parker wants that animal in one piece." Just as Thomas had predicted, the entire search team redirected their attention to Rex, who led them on a merry chase into the woods on the western side of the road, away from where Thomas, Sandra, and Marcus would be heading. "Now," Marcus urged, "while they're distracted." They slipped away eastward, deeper into the forest, using the smoke from the growing fire as additional cover. Thomas supported both Sandra and Marcus now, the latter's wound continuing to bleed despite their makeshift bandage. "Will Rex be able to find us?" Sandra asked anxiously as they pushed through dense underbrush. "If anyone can, he will," Thomas assured her, though his own heart ached with worry for his faithful partner. "He's never failed me yet." They made slower progress than Thomas hoped, hindered by Marcus's injury and the difficult terrain. The sounds of pursuit faded behind them, but so did Thomas's confidence in their escape plan. Marcus was growing paler by the minute, losing blood despite their efforts to staunch the wound. "There," Marcus finally gasped, pointing ahead to a small clearing where a dilapidated cabin stood. The hunting camp. The structure was little more than a shack, its wooden walls weathered gray with age, windows boarded up against vandals. But it represented their best hope for shelter and possibly supplies. Thomas helped Marcus to the porch while Sandra tried the door. It was locked, but the rotting wood gave way with a solid push from Thomas's shoulder. Inside, dust covered everything, but the basic structure was sound. A table, chairs, an old wood stove, and, most promising, a ham radio set up in the corner. "Does it work?" Sandra asked as Thomas eased Marcus into a chair. Marcus shook his head. "Needs power. Check for a generator out back." Thomas found a small generator behind the cabin, old but potentially serviceable. After several attempts, he managed to get it running, a sputtering roar that seemed obscenely loud in the quiet forest. Back inside, he connected the radio to the power source, holding his breath as he flipped the switch. A dial light came on, and static crackled from the speaker. "It works," he said, relief evident in his voice. "Do you know how to use it?" Sandra asked. Thomas nodded. "Basic training at the academy, plus some experience from my military days." He adjusted dials, searching for the emergency frequency. When he found it, he picked up the microphone and pressed the transmit button. "Mayday, Mayday. This is Officer Thomas Reynolds, Millfield Police Department. We are in distress, requesting immediate assistance." Over. Static answered him. He tried again, giving their approximate location based on Marcus's guidance. Still nothing. The signal might not be reaching far enough, Marcus suggested. Try other frequencies. Thomas was about to do so when a scratching sound at the door made them all freeze. Sandra grabbed a fireplace poker while Thomas drew his gun. Marcus, too weak to stand, pulled his own weapon and aimed it shakily at the entrance. The scratching continued, followed by a familiar whine. Thomas's heart leapt. "Rex!" he exclaimed, rushing to open the door. The German shepherd bounded in, immediately going to Thomas and checking him over as if ensuring he was unharmed. His fur was damp and muddy, but he appeared uninjured. "Good boy," Thomas praised, kneeling to embrace the dog despite his protesting wounds. "Best partner ever." Rex accepted the affection briefly, then pulled away, returning to the door and whining again, looking back at Thomas expectantly. "What is it, boy? Someone coming?" The dog barked once, pawing at the door. "He wants us to follow him," Sandra realized. Thomas hesitated, looking at Marcus. "Can you walk?" The former detective nodded grimly. "If it's important enough for him to come back for us, I'll manage." They followed Rex outside and across the clearing to a narrow trail leading deeper into the forest. The German shepherd paused frequently to ensure they were keeping up, especially attentive to Marcus's labored progress. After about a quarter-mile they heard it, the distinctive thrum of helicopter rotors. "Someone searching the area," Marcus said, tension evident in his voice. "Could be Davis called in air support." But Rex showed no signs of alarm. Instead, he led them more urgently toward the sound. They emerged from the trees into a small meadow just as a helicopter descended, stirring the grass with powerful downdrafts. It wasn't a police helicopter, but a sleek black one with no markings. The side door slid open before the skids even touched the ground. A woman in a dark suit leapt out, followed by two men with the unmistakable bearing of federal agents. "Devereaux," the woman called over the engine noise. "Reynolds, over here." Thomas supported Marcus as they approached cautiously, Rex leading the way with confident strides. "Elizabeth Chen," the woman introduced herself when they reached her, showing federal credentials. "U.S. Attorney's Office. Your dog found our search team and led them here." "My dog?" Thomas asked, bewildered. Chen nodded. "We were at the rendezvous point, waiting. When you didn't show, we started searching. One of my agents spotted your dog leading a group of local officers on a chase. When the dog gave them the slip, my agent followed him instead. Good thing he did." Thomas looked down at Rex in amazement. Somehow, the German shepherd had not only escaped Davis's men, but had also found federal agents and led them back to his humans. That's incredible," he managed. "We'll have time for the full story later," Chen said briskly. "Right now, we need to get you all out of here. Mr. Devereaux needs medical attention, and we have reports of multiple armed locals converging on this area." Within minutes, they were airborne, Marcus receiving emergency treatment from an agent with medical training. As the helicopter rose above the forest canopy, Thomas could see smoke from the fire they'd started, now spreading more widely than intended. Several vehicles were visible on the road below, including what appeared to be Davis's convoy. "They were closing in," Chen remarked, following his gaze. "Another 30 minutes and they would have had you." Sandra sat beside Thomas, one hand gripping his, the other resting on Rex's head. The German shepherd had refused to leave Thomas's side, even inside the unfamiliar helicopter. "Where are we going?" Sandra asked Chen. "Safe house in Richmond first," the federal prosecutor replied. "We'll take your statements, get medical care for all of you, then witness protection until the case is resolved." "All of us?" Thomas clarified, glancing meaningfully at Rex. Chen smiled. "Your dog has earned a place in the program, I'd say. Besides, after what he did today, separating you would be cruel and unusual punishment for both of you." As the helicopter carried them towards safety, Thomas felt the adrenaline that had sustained him finally ebbing away. His wounds throbbed, and exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him. But looking at Sandra, at Marcus, and especially at Rex, he felt something else too. Profound gratitude. "You saved us all," he told Rex softly, stroking the dog's head. "Good boy. Best boy." Rex simply leaned against him, amber eyes fixed on Thomas's face with unwavering devotion. 3 months later, Thomas stepped onto the porch of a modest farmhouse in western Montana, coffee mug in hand. The morning air was crisp with the approach of autumn, the surrounding mountains already showing hints of gold among the evergreens. Behind him, the screen door creaked open, and Sandra emerged with her own mug wrapped in a cardigan against the morning chill. "Beautiful day," she observed, settling into the rocking chair beside his. "Every day here is beautiful," Thomas replied, meaning it. After the chaos and danger they'd survived, the peace of this place felt like a gift. Their new identities, Thomas and Sandra Wilson, had come with this property, a small horse farm that provided both seclusion and purpose. The federal marshals checked in regularly but discreetly, and their new neighbors believed them to be a retired police officer and his mother relocating for her health. Rex bounded around the corner of the house, returning from his morning patrol of the property. He climbed the porch steps and settled at Thomas's feet with a contented sigh. "Has he checked the entire perimeter?" Sandra asked with a smile. "Twice, I'm sure," Thomas replied, reaching down to scratch behind the dog's ears. "Old habits." The trial of Chief Parker, Captain Davis, and 12 other officers was ongoing in Virginia, making headlines nationwide. Elizabeth Chen had built an airtight case using Johnny's evidence and their testimony, which they'd provided via secure video link. Marcus, now recovered from his gunshot wound, had been given a new identity as well, relocated with his daughter to Arizona where she could receive specialized medical care. Sandra's Alzheimer's had stabilized with proper medication and reduced stress. She still had occasional episodes of confusion, but they were managing it together, one day at a time. "I was thinking," she said, rocking gently, "maybe we could get another dog, a companion for Rex. He might enjoy having a friend." Thomas smiled. The suggestion was typical of his mother's thoughtfulness. "I think that's a great idea. We could check the local shelter next week." Rex's ears perked up at the word dog, his head tilting inquisitively. "Yes, we're talking about you," Thomas assured him. "Thinking about finding you a friend." The German shepherd gave a soft woof that sounded remarkably like approval. As they sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun climb higher over the mountains, Thomas reflected on the strange journey that had brought them here. A coffin with the wrong body, a faithful dog who wouldn't stop barking, a mother who refused to give up hope. The truth had nearly cost them everything, but in the end, it had given them something precious, a second chance, together. Rex suddenly stood, alert, but not alarmed, his tail wagging slightly. Moments later, a car appeared on their long driveway, their marshal liaison making his weekly check-in. "Right on time," Sandra noted, rising to go inside and put on more coffee. Thomas remained seated, watching Rex trot down the steps to greet their visitor with appropriate caution, but no hostility. The German shepherd had adapted to their new life with remarkable ease, as if understanding that his most important job, keeping his family safe, remained unchanged regardless of location. "Best partner," Thomas murmured, raising his coffee mug in a small salute to the dog who had saved not just his life, but his soul. Best family. And in the clear Montana morning, with dangers past and future possibilities stretching before them, Thomas Reynolds, now Wilson, knew with absolute certainty that they would be okay. All thanks to a German shepherd who wouldn't stop barking. And German shepherd wouldn't stop barking. Inside the coffin was pure terror. We witnessed the extraordinary bond between Thomas and Rex, a reminder that loyalty transcends all boundaries. For many of us in our golden years, we understand that life's most precious gifts often come with forepaws and unconditional love. This story touches our hearts because it speaks to what we value most. Family connections that endure despite separation, the courage to start anew when life forces unexpected changes, and the comfort of having someone who notices when we're lost and guides us home. Like Sandra, we may fear becoming burdens to our loved ones or losing precious memories, but this story reminds us that true love adapts and perseveres. What faithful companion has been your lighthouse during life's storms? Has there been a moment when an animal's intuition proved wiser than human reasoning in your life? Please share your stories in the comments below. Your experiences might be exactly what another reader needs to hear today. Remember, it's never too late for second chances, new beginnings, or opening your heart to the silent wisdom of a faithful friend.